This webinar today is co-hosted by the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Project Wild program and the Federal Junior Duck Stamp program. We also have a generous donation from Blick Art Materials, and we'll be raffling off this set of materials later on. It's valued at $100, so you'll have to be present to win. And if folks just joining us, if you could go ahead and turn off your video and make sure you're muted. We have possibly 500 people today, so we're gonna conserve screen space and bandwidth. And on that note, I'm going to ask Suzanne to do the impossible and tell us about the duck stamp in 1.5 minutes.
Okay, put the timer on. So my name is Suzanne Fellows. I work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Federal Duck Stamp Office. The duck stamp is an extra license that anybody who hunts migratory birds purchases each year as part of their licensing fee. If you give me the next slide, Mark. It is a program that has been going on since 1934. In 1980s, they decided that why should adults have all the fun? We wanted to have juniors, youth in kindergarten through 12th grade, be able to participate as well and learn about conservation through the arts. We have a full curriculum. The program extends to all 50 states, DC, and the US territories. Each year, we have about 25,000 students who enter, and we produce a federal junior duck stamp from the best to show from the national contest each year. We see that we get about 300,000 families, community members each year who engage in part of the program, either through the art contest or through the activities that go on with the junior duck stamp. And we will be more than happy to talk about it more. On to you, Mark.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. All right. About Project Wild, which is the program I'm with, many of you may know Project Wild. It's been around since 1983, and it was developed by educators at state fish and wildlife agencies. It's used by many formal and non-formal pre-K through 12th grade educators. We have 4 main curricula guides: the Project Wild terrestrial guide up there on the top left of the shared screen, Aquatic Wild, Flying Wild, the Migratory Bird program, and then Growing Up Wild, which is our early childhood program. And so Project Wild activities involve incorporating content about wildlife and habitat, environmental stewardship into the curriculum or the out-of-school programming, regardless of what subject you teach or what grade level or age level or developmental level you're working with. And we have many activities that are simulations or models of natural phenomena, as well as human interactions and processes and decision-making models. We have field investigations and several other types of activities, stewardship projects, citizen science connections, and many STEM connections as well. There are 4 activities that come to mind from the Project Wild terrestrial guide that are particularly well connected to the use of art, illustration, sketching, nature journaling. These are the 4, and I was hoping to put in some more graphics here, as you can see on my note, but if you have a Project Wild guide, you can look those up. And if you don't, you can get one by going to a Project Wild training. So if you go to projectwild.org, you get to this landing page, and the second yellow button there, Get Training, will take you to a menu of who it is in your state, or if you're in Canada, who to contact for Project Wild professional development training. And I know there's people here from about 7 different countries today, or that have registered, and we're not in every country, but we're in Japan, United States, Canada, and we have a few things that are for sale you can purchase directly without taking the professional development training. Okay, I want to say one last thing about Project Wild. If you know someone who is an instructor at the college level and you use Project Wild in your curricula or your programming or your coursework, and you're interested in getting a mini grant from the National Office of Project Wild, please send me an email. We're looking for instructors at the college level that use Project Wild. Maybe you're a pre-service, you work with pre-service educators or environmental science students. And Kelly, if you wouldn't mind typing my email address into the chat, I'd appreciate it. Contact me if you are interested or if you know someone who might be. All right, so now it is my pleasure to introduce our featured artist today. And as you can probably hear from my paper shuffling, I want to make sure I get the wording just right, because Rebekah has an impressive bio in my opinion. So Rebekah Lowell is an author and illustrator and surface designer with a passion for the natural world. Her debut novel in verse, The Road to After, publishes with Nancy Polson Books and Penguin Random House in May 2022. And her debut picture book, Catching Flight, publishes with Doubleday Random House in the spring of 2023. As a survivor of domestic abuse, Rebekah has found the outdoors to be a healing grounds. When not in her studio, you can find her birding, gardening, and raising butterflies, often with her daughters, who she homeschools. She has a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Illustration from the Rhode Island School of Design and a Master of Fine Arts in Children's Literature and Illustration from Hollins University. Her artwork has been featured on the Maine Duck Stamp 4 times, and she is also an art educator locally and online. She lives with her family in her hometown of Bidford, Maine, and you can learn more and see her artwork at her website at www.RebekahLowell.com. And we can type that in the chat too, www.RebekahLowell.com. And also I want to say not to be confused with our guest speaker next week, which is Rebekah Knight. Rebekah spelled the same way. If that's not confusing, I don't know what is. Okay, Rebekah, thank you for presenting today, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here, and I hope that what I have to offer today is some use. And yeah, like Mark said, I love nature, and so combining nature and art just feels like where I'm meant to be. So if you could go to the next slide, I think this was one of our screenshots. There we go. And I guess the next one after here. Okay, so what we will be drawing is a pine cone. Oh, can you spotlight my paper? There we go. Does oh, now it's turned. Hold on. I just need this.
And Rebekah, while you're doing that, I'll let people know Rebekah has a really interesting setup that she's using a light over her paper that is a round light that she can put her phone directly on top of. And so she, we're seeing her through her computer camera, but she also has her phone connected.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure I have the orientation right. It switches on me sometimes. Okay. All right, can you see my hands?
Yes, it's looking good.
All right, so we are going to be drawing pine cone with pencils and a dried yellow tansy flower with colored pencils. So if you guys want to follow along, any colored pencils that you have are fine. These come from my garden. And then we're also going to be painting an acorn or two with watercolor. And at this point, we wanted to talk about why we chose not to include feathers. in our workshop today.
And if I may jump in on that point, so as you may know, feathers from wild birds wild birds are protected in the United States. And as part of that protection, there are limits on what you can collect, including feathers. And so the feathers of many wild birds are things you should not be collecting, or your students should not be collecting and keeping. Okay, and part of the reasoning there is it helps protect the birds, and people aren't going to go hunt birds and ever for their feathers and get away with it easily. And so we keep the feathers in nature. If you're outside in nature and there's feathers on the ground and you use them as a subject for your art or your nature journaling, that's great. If you can pick them up, you can put them back where you found them, but can't collect them. If you want to get feathers that you can keep, you can acquire them at craft stores where they are taken from domesticated birds. You may have friends who are licensed hunters and have permits to hunt and harvest birds that way, and using their feathers is also acceptable. Okay, yes. Rebecca, go on.
All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is start drawing this pine cone. So we talked about how I'm going to be using pencil. And one thing to consider when you're using pencil is that you're going to be using grayscale. So it's important. Some of the key things that I look for are the darkest darks. This is just a grayscale chart that I made in art school, and I still reference it. So the darkest darks and then the lightest lights. And in the set that we're going to be giving away, there are different grades of pencils. So you have, your H's, which are your harder pencils, and then there are the B's. So those are softer. So you can also change your grayscale by pressure. So these are just some different pencils that I have from Blackwing. And what I'm going to do is just start drawing because I tend to think on paper. So I'm looking, and if you want to follow along, we do have a photo that has the pine cone in a still shot with the pencils right there. And then, does everyone still see my paper? We had a trick before where we had both screens up.
Yes, right now I can see your Mark's shared screen with the still shot and your spotlighted video. Okay. And as Jude pointed out in the chat, folks, if you don't have speaker view, that'll help make that Rebecca's drawing bigger for you.
Yes, right. It's called side-by-side view. If you click on that, then you can see both screens at once. So I'm just going to start drawing here. What I do first, I don't start with the detail. I get the rough shape first because the eraser is actually my favorite drawing tool. And with pine cones, there are patterns to look for. There are kind of like rings and stages where the, see, I should know these terms, but I am not a scientist. But these different, I don't know. I mean, it's like a petal, but it's not. It's where the seeds are. The seeds are down in here. Tendrils, I don't know. They probably have a better name than that. If anyone knows, pop it in the chat. But I look for size differences in that. And I may not get everything right, but that's why I'm drawing. Because one thing that I know by drawing natural objects is that you learn something every time you draw. It's different than a photo because with a photo, you don't have to look very closely. You're learning by drawing. And that's one of the things that I love in drawing natural objects is that you're also learning the structure and function of the item that you're drawing. And you can learn more about it by looking closely. As Mark said, I do teach in person sometimes, and I'm a homeschool mom, so we have a co-op, and I was teaching drawing natural objects with a class, I think it was 4th grade, and there was a young girl who found purple in a seashell and she drew it on there. And it's something that you wouldn't have noticed in just looking at the shell at a glance. But because she was drawing the shell, she saw that purple and she included it in her drawing. And someone who was helping me, an assistant, they said, "Oh wow, I didn't see that there was purple on that shell until you drew it." And then it was, sure enough, it was there. So I feel like it hones observation skills, and that also applies to everything in life. So I'm not making this perfect because I'm trying to draw this inside of 10 minutes and I was supposed to put my timer. So I'll do like 7 minutes because I'm drawing 3 things. So I want to make sure that I have enough time. So I'm looking at this pine cone and I'm seeing that there are these triangle shapes, and under those is the dark area of each of those sort of pine cone petals. That's what I'm going to call them for now. And one neat thing, I know, I don't know, you guys might know this, but if you put a pine cone in water, they tighten up. And then when you take it out, it dries. So all of this would close right up in water. But you're all teachers, so you probably know that. It's pretty neat though. So this is from a white pine in my yard. We have lots of white pines in Maine. And there's some pitch at the top right here. So I'm just using one pencil right now to kind of block all this in. And I'm looking for those grayscales. Another really great thing about drawing in general is that the head-to-hand connection gets better with practice. Even as a grown artist who has drawn for a very long time, I don't always get my art to look the way that I want it to look. And so I'm still working on that head-to-hand connection, but it gets better with time. All right, now I'm going to go in with a slightly lighter pencil, less pressure, and just fill this in. Anybody has questions? I don't know that I could read the chat and draw at the same time, but if anyone wants to read them for me, I could try to answer any questions if there are any.
We will sure do that. One of the questions that has come up just in a message to me was about discussion of integrating into curriculum, and to me that connects to the educational value of illustrating and nature journaling. And one big connection is the illustration as a model. You're representing, models can represent objects, they can represent a process, a phenomena. In this case, it's an object. And so imagine the amount of data that is represented or that is collected, with an illustration or a map, which is a kind of illustration that would be really impossible to do, or very, very difficult to do using, say, words and numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, using words and numbers, and along with illustrating with the shapes and the colors and the textures, they go hand in hand when you're nature journaling.
We have a couple of questions in the chat about the pencil types you've used so far, Rebekah.
Sure. So these are my favorite pencils. They're by Blackwing. I don't know if you can see that right there. I don't know the hardness or softness, like it's not an HB or a 2H, or they don't print it on there. But I would imagine these are in the B range because they are still quite soft. This one here, the Blackwing Palomino, is their softest, and this gets the darkest dark. So this would be equivalent to like a 7 or 8B. And if I get in there and I push real hard, it's going to get like a nice, rich, dark tone. And I would save that for the lowest parts of the Pinecone pieces. it gets a real nice range. But I really do like these. I think I like them for that range that they have, because you can, you know, vary it according to the pressure. The nice thing about that set from Blick though, too, is that a lot of those gradations are already there. What we typically write with, like the yellow pencils, I think it's a 2B. I could be wrong on that, but I think, you know, that's kind of the middle ground of pencil and graphite, like hardness and softness.
Rebecca, I have a question extending from one of the participants, and that is, how much time would you give an elementary school students to complete a drawing like this pine cone?
I would give them, really, what I say is probably as long as they need, but if you're trying to plan and think of like, how long is this kind of drawing gonna take? Probably 20 minutes to a half an hour, but also that's a long span of time to be drawing one object if it's something that feels complex. So if I, you know, was going to draw this in a different way, I might not include every single little piece. You know, you can simplify shapes and still understand the object. It doesn't have to be this detailed. So I think that it's really up to how long or how detailed that you want to get into it with them. I think that the general ideas are that you're honing their observation skills. You're having them think about shape. So one real overarching sort of quality to nature journal is like, what is the shape of the object? That's why when I first started, I drew it like this. And then, you know, if I was going to break it down, I might just notice a pattern here. And you can still teach about pine cones for different age groups by breaking down the pattern. And it still shows the same concept. So it depends on how you want to go about it, I guess. I do want to say I don't have a degree in teaching. I'm not an educator by background, but I teach art. And I don't know, I'm not as, I don't have a specialty in, sorry. Trying to get my timer to stop. Yeah, I don't have a specialty in like specific grades, if that answers the question.
So I wanted to address a few other comments. So right now we have the shared screen with the pine cones on it.
Yeah.
As something available for everyone to look at and practice drawing if they want to.
Yes.
And then we also have Rebecca's screen. And if you want to make the screen spotlighting Rebecca's pad and hands larger, there should be a way you can do that by resizing the windows that you're looking at. There's also a view you can use. Rebecca, what was that view called? The side-by-side view?
Side-by-side view.
Yeah,
yes.
Okay. And then from there, you might be able to resize it more. You know, another option we could do if a lot of people are having trouble with that is we could just have Rebecca's hands showing and
yeah, that would be fine.
Okay, and then you could just look at the pine cone on her desk and draw it from there as well. Should we try that?
Sure, that's
Okay.
That's okay with me.
Okay, now
I should probably move on to the next object to
Okay.
make sure that we have time.
Yeah,
I did
okay.
see real quick in the chat, someone mentioned Fibonacci, and I think that's a really good point, is that there are patterns like that. And so you can incorporate like the Fibonacci spiral and pattern, and this pine cone definitely has that. I should have mentioned that. And, you know, that's bringing in math and science into art. So it's really bringing STEAM, you know, that concept of STEAM into our education, which is really important. So I'm going to put the Pinecone aside and move on to the Tansy. So before I show you that, I'm just going to slide in. This is a page of my nature journal. So as the Tansies were in my garden, I sketched this. This was November 20th. And shortly after that, we had a frost. So I was really glad that I took the time and drew them because they were at their brightest color. But one thing I learned about them, and this is some of that same Tansy, is that by looking closely, I noticed that leaves grew at the intersections of the stems, not randomly in the center. They grew where there was an intersection and where the plant split off. So as you're choosing objects to draw with your students, it's really neat to keep in mind questions that you can ask them, like what can they learn about the plant by looking at it? So here's some colored pencils now. And I think I'm going to draw this bigger piece. So with a natural object like a plant like this, that has stems, that has lots, it's complicated. Don't feel like you have to go for perfect. I don't. I always say done is better than perfect.
And Rebekah, well, I'm going to jump in and say again, I've changed the spotlight just to your hands, and
Okay.
if enough people start texting that they wanted to go back to have the two screens, I can change it back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. We are flexible.
I also wanted to read a few other comments, if I may.
Sure.
So one from Mitchell Bailey, when having students create drawings like this in my elementary science lab, I find it helpful to break a 20 to 30 minute period into multiple 5-minute blocks. With time to discuss and critique in between, it is often that students will think that they are done in 5 to 8 minutes.
Yeah, sometimes it is, that's a really good way to do it. Break it down into steps. And each time, I'm curious, if you say, well, what else can you see? Can you look closer? What else do you notice? So those are really interesting questions to ask too. I do like breaking things down and taking a moment to look away and look back. That does help. One way that I draw plants like this is that I look for, it doesn't erase too well, but I look for negative shapes. So I drew that a little bit wrong. Like this triangle shape right here is wider than the way that I drew it. So I can tell that like my angle is a little bit off. So I don't just look for the stem that I'm drawing. I look for that space in between. So that's another way to approach drawing natural objects with your students, is to look when there's an opportunity, look for negative space in the way something grows, because you can learn a lot about the plant and the way that it grows by the negative as well as the positive. And if I'm not being clear, the negative shape is like the air. It's like it's what's not there. Because the stems make, see, I was looking at my object, not the paper I drew off of it, but the stems make a negative shape as well as the positive. So I always find that's interesting to look at and can help gauge, where you are on a piece. I'm not going to be able to draw like every bud, and I'm actually going to get another color, and this is dried up, so I don't have as much of the color anymore. But dried plants are great to draw and study, and they stick around for a while if they don't fall apart. So they're nice specimens to have like on hand.
Rebekah, for the purpose of helping you pace yourself, you have about 15 minutes left.
All right. So I'm almost done on this one. And what I'm going to do, I, tried to think of what I was going to do with these drawings after. I'm going to finish these and then put them in my shop and donate the proceeds to share between Project Wild and the Junior Duck Stamp. So probably within the next week, I'll have those up. I do have an email list, so if anyone wants to be on it, it's on my website, and that's probably how I'll announce the listings. So.
And thank you for that.
You're welcome. So this is with colored pencil, and colored pencil is great because, especially like, let's say you take a class outside and you're just, sitting in the yard. Colored pencil is portable while still being able to capture color. And color is part of observation. I started with Grayscale because drawing is the foundation to everything, and being able to see shape and form comes before seeing the color. But color is definitely part of developing your observational skills. So I'm going to set this one aside. It's not perfect, but it kind of gives you an idea. I'll finish it and then pop it up in my shop. So the last thing.
Rebecca, I'm going to once again interrupt
Yeah.
and let people know we're going to have time for questions and comments in the last 10 minutes, we hope. In the meantime, feel free to keep your questions and comments rolling on in the chat too.
All right. One tricky thing about watercolor. So I'm going to bring my palette here so you guys can see what I'm doing. This is my travel palette. It's just like the one that you're going to be getting, whoever wins it. So watercolor is very concentrated. And so you get your color by adding water. It reconstitutes. So all this paint that dried up, you just re-wet it. It can be used for later. Something like acrylics, that doesn't happen. All right. So again, looking at shape first. I start light with watercolor and then build. One thing about acorns specifically, or any other kind of tree nut, sometimes they have holes in them or different, like this one has, I don't know if you guys can see that, but it has this like darker patch here. So one thing I like to keep in mind with something that is, it seems plain and simple, like an acorn seems like there's not much to it. What are the subtleties? So that's what I would look for in objects that feel like they're self-explanatory and very upfront, and you don't, see a lot that really stands out. It's like, okay, look closer. What else do you see? And sometimes I feel like objects even have a story to tell. Like, let's say this one had a hole in it. You can strike up conversation and ask kids, what do you think happened? What do you think this acorn story is? And kids are so imaginative, and they're going to come up with something. They're going to think, they're going to guess, they're going to, want to know more, and probably spur on some really interesting conversation. So I'm going to add a little bit of blue. Right now, I've just started with some sienna and sepia, and I'm going to add a little bit of blue for this dark spot. Mix it with brown because it gets a darker tone. One thing I also like doing with materials is combining them. So when this dries, I might even take colored pencil and add some of that patterning in the top. I might try to add that around the edges, or, oops, popped out of my hand. Maybe add some more of those lines, and they're vertical. You can see they're not bands around like a tree, they're vertical. Whoops. So it's just really interesting to look at objects and see how close can you look, what can you notice that you probably would have overlooked, and what does that tell you about the object? And maybe what comes next, for the acorn. Like, for instance, this would, break open and sprout if it was left in the ground. And where do they think the sprout would come from? Where do they think the acorn would break open? There's just lots to consider. You know, more than you would think in just looking at an acorn.
There's been lots of chat about use of color and use of grayscale and monochromatic shades, and how, for example, grayscale forces you to see some details that you might not otherwise see.
Yes.
As well as the subtle textures and shapes.
Yes. Definitely. And that's why I started with the pine cone. If I was going to draw a pine cone like that, if I wanted to really look for everything on it, it would probably take me a couple hours. If I really wanted it to be super detailed. And that is definitely true. All those little pitch spots on it. The way that the lower part of each segment, maybe that was the better word. I don't know. Did someone put it in the chat, by the way, what the pieces of the pine cone were called? Because I feel silly that I don't know.
Yes, no, they did. There were two responses I saw, were two different categories of answers. The bract, and some folks call it a scale.
A scale, yes,
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay,
So
and the bract, like B-R-A-C-T?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and there was another question I wanted to ask you too, and that's about the paper. What would you recommend for the kinds of paper to use?
Oh, sure. So the paper that I was drawing this on, I did want to touch on that. So thank you. This is a rough texture. For pencil, I really should have grabbed something smooth, but this was a Canson 140-pound cold press. And that gives you a texture. It's really a watercolor paper, and I drew pencil on it. So I do kind of mix and match papers. What I'm painting on now is a 140-pound hot press, which is smooth, and it helps you get more refined texture with watercolors. I really like painting on it. I get both. So cold press will give you a tooth to the paper, and hot press will be smooth. And I like using both, and I like using 140-pound because any less, like if it's 90, the paper buckles. And by that, I mean, it kind of gets like a washboard, like it gets waves into it when you wet it, and it bends easy. So I like using 140-pound cold press and hot press. And Fabriano is a good brand, Canson, Strathmore. So the brand I find is less important than the weight and the texture. If that helps.
Yeah.
There was
See,
one
now that
question.
Sorry, go ahead.
There was one question about tips on doing this outside with kids.
Yes. So outside, I would say try to be as portable as you can. And in that, like, colored pencils are super portable and dry. You're not going to get any spills. Depending on the age group, watercolor travel kits are a lot of fun. And this actually pops out to hold their water on the side. And you put the water in right here. I usually like bringing a water bottle or something that contains the water, and you can put it in here. The trouble after would be like disposing of the paint water. So I like to have an empty container and not just dump the paint water on the ground. Because even though the paints, like watercolor is less toxic, I just feel like leave no trace is a good thing to go by. And so I don't dump my paint water out like onto the ground or anything. So as you're packing your materials, think of bringing an empty container for like the gray water and a clean container with, another container for clean water.
Great.
And of course, pencil is great outside. So I'm just adding some texture in the top here. Mark, let me know when I'm done.
Okay. Yeah, you have, if you could get to a stopping point in about 5 or 6 minutes, that would be great.
Oh, okay. That's more time than I thought.
And gosh, there's a lot of great comments just rolling in, and I can make the chat available too when I send out the links to the recording and to the slide deck next week. And for those of you, everybody really, you can also save your chat. There's the 3 little buttons at the bottom of the chat window, and if at the end of the session, if you save the chat, you can review all of the questions and answers from many educators who are in attendance today. So Rebekah, you're not the only one teaching today. There's a bunch of people who are chiming in with great ideas.
That's great.
Questions.
That's great. I can cover the art, but as far as like you know, strategy and stuff like that, like how to present this, I'm less of an expert there. But what I would say in my experience teaching homeschoolers is to keep encouraging the kids. One real big aspect to just encourage learning overall, and I'm sure everyone here knows this, is praise. You know, tell them how great they did on something. What I like to do with a critique is the sandwich method, is like something positive, something helpful, and something positive again. And that tends to be really well received when I do that method. And it's like you're just trying to encourage the learner, you know, to look closer and to notice more and ask questions. Because keeping curiosity alive, I think, is one of the most important aspects of learning. And I try to do that. Definitely, I'm not perfect at it, but try to. And, you know, I learn a lot from kids, that's for sure. I feel like kids have so much to offer. All right, so I think this is, so it's wet all around here. So it's hard to add stripes and texture when it's wet on wet. So what I like to do with watercolor is let it dry, then I revisit it and add more texture and detail. So if I have any time left, I can just come back and continue working on the Pinecone, because I probably would. This is a very hard pencil. This is a 3H. And you'll notice, even if I give it a little pressure, I don't get a strong value. So that's the really interesting thing about pencils, is that you can change the shade according to the strength of the pencil or by how much you press down on it.
Rebekah,
Also,
do you have any tips for fixing watercolor, which I take to mean like holding the watercolor to the page so it doesn't come off later?
I never spray anything on my watercolors. If I feel like something is going to smudge a lot with pencil, I use a spray fixative, but it's very toxic, so I do it outside. And I don't mean outside as in like it gets on things. I mean like you need ventilation. You need like an open window or stand in your garage. But it's strong. So I don't recommend fixative really at all because of the toxicity of it. But if the question they meant is how do you fix it if it's an error, do you think it was that kind of fix?
Well, maybe it was. Tips for fixing, yeah, could mean that too. How do you fix something that you consider an error? Well,
with watercolor, sadly, there's not much you can do. It's like a stain on your paper. So what I do in that situation is I use something called acrylic gouache. So it's kind of like, or acrylic paint. So basically watercolor is translucent. So it's like see-through, but if you use acrylics, they're opaque. So in that sense, I would bring in some acrylic paints if there was something I really wanted to change, which does happen in my illustration work. So I tend to like to work in mixed media so that I have that flexibility.
Okay, well, we're about at the point where we're gonna pick a winner of the art supplies. But before we do, Rebekah, is there anything else you wanted to say before we transition?
I don't think so. I just thank you for having me, and I hope this was helpful. And if anyone does have further questions, feel free to message me on, I have different social media platforms, or my email is on my website, or if you have questions, Mark can get them to me, or Suzanne.
Okay.
So
Well,
I hope this was helpful, and thank you so
yeah.
much.
Well, thank you. And in a few minutes, we probably will have questions that we'll need your help with too.
All right.
So I'm going to share, and Rebecca, I'll just leave your hands there. You can
Sure.
keep working if you want to, but
I'll mute so that the
Okay.
scratching of my pencil doesn't interfere.
So I just shared my screen, and I want to show you that on the left, I have an Excel sheet that I downloaded at 3:30, and I'm gonna pick a person on there, and if they're in attendance, then they'll win the supplies. If you are that person, we need to get your mailing address, and so you can stay on after to let us know, or you can email me, and then I can send it on to Suzanne Fellows, who, as you know, with the Federal Junior Duck Stamp, and she'll mail it to you. Okay, also on my screen is a random number generator, courtesy of Google's offerings. And so I'm gonna pick a number between 1 and 519. If the person is not in attendance, or if they're an employee of AFWA, or if it's Rebecca or Suzanne, we'll do it again. Here we go. And I got number 152. And so let's see who that is. Okay, so we have Katie Goodwin. If you're on today, you can unmute yourself, or let us know in the chat that you're here. We'll give you a moment to do that.
Thanks, Mark. I never win, but I need to turn it back. And so do you want to roll again, or do we have any students?
You mean turn it back because you're with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service?
I am.
Thank you.
Unless
that.
I give it to my teachers.
I
but,
forgot that category. Yeah, well, it's okay with me if you give it to your teachers, whatever you think is best. But we understand
Suzanne,
that you're not
I'll
able
defer
to.
Yeah,
Katie, Katie, go ahead and pick on somebody else, and we will help you with your teacher work, Katie.
Sounds good. Yeah,
Okay,
if there's a student online, or you roll again, I think that would be best.
Okay, well then I'll go ahead and roll again. Here we go. 327. We have Sarah Downard. Sarah, are you on today?
I am. I also
All right.
never win anything.
Okay, and you're not with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
I am not, no.
Okay. Great. All right, so you can text me or Suzanne Fellows in the chat, just in the private chat, your address, or stay on afterwards, or email it, however you want to do that. But we need an address, not a PO box.
Okay,
All right, congratulations.
thank you.
Okay, and then moving on, Suzanne, I'm gonna get back here to, let me make sure I have my shared screen where I want it. Hold on. Yeah, okay. So this is, again, thanks to Blick, very generous to offer this. It was a set of 12 colored paints, erasable colored pencils, a set of 12 drawing pencils, valued at $100. Now,
I have them all
Suzanne,
here, so I will make sure that I get them to you.
okay, if you want to wrap up with last points about the Federal Junior Duck Stamp that are shown on the slide, go for it.
Okay, thank you. Rebecca, that was absolutely awesome. I first met Rebecca as a duck stamp, federal duck stamp artist, and her daughters are in the junior program. And like I said, we have a full curriculum. We offer different resources. You heard from Katie Goodwin, who is our coordinator out of Wisconsin. Each state has their own state coordinator who is there to help you and to if you enter the contest to get your artwork judged. And but Katie also offers a bunch of different resources. They have field trips. Some of our refuges have the coordinators right there, but field trips are a great way for students to get out and learn, practice some of the Project Wild activities, and practice some art drawings and use some of the skills we learned today. One of the things that we want everybody to remember is that art is in the eye of the beholder. So while most of our junior duck stamp artwork and most of our duck stamp artwork is very realistic, we are more than happy to see different styles. If you have students who are really into tribal or ethnic art or really into abstract, we'd encourage them to try their hand at learning a little bit about wetlands and waterfowl, and showing us how they interpret them in their art style of themselves. We have, like I said, we have coordinators who can help you out. Unfortunately, our website, our national website, is going through a change. The best thing I can suggest is that you Google Junior Duck Stamp Contest to get the most up-to-date information, or contact myself or Mark. The deadlines are coming up for most of the states for the art contest, but the program itself can be used year-round. And with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Mark.
Okay, earlier I mentioned the connection to illustration as models, and this slide is from the Next Generation Science Standards. It captures some of the connections to using sketching and illustration. In particular, there on the left, under science and engineering practices, in this case, kindergarten through second grade students can develop a simple model based on evidence to represent a proposed object or tool. Okay, so this is practice that goes throughout scientific practices and engineering practices. Illustration as a core idea. Designs can be conveyed through sketches and drawings or physical models, and they're useful in representing and communicating ideas for problems, solutions to other people. And then cross-cutting concepts about shape and stability of structure, which is, connected to the idea of form and function from the older national science standards. So learning about the form and function of, say, animal adaptations or the adaptations of a pine tree, and how a pine cone helps as a carrier and protector of seeds. So this is just one example of connections to science standards. And of course, there's going to be other standards across the curricula that we could connect illustrating to, but I wanted to at least make this one available in our limited time. Okay, and so we're gonna, in a moment, take some questions and comments. I'm gonna make this the last slide on the shared screen and remind you that next week at the same time is our part 2 for high school and middle school educators with Rebekah Knight. So with that, we're gonna look for questions in the chat. If you want to turn on your video, you're welcome to, or unmute yourself and ask a question that way. We can try that too. And Kelly or Suzanne, if you saw any questions in the chat that you wanted to bring up, feel free.
not seeing any questions. But thank you, Rebecca. This was really great. Getting a lot of kudos.
Yes, indeed. I'm scrolling back way up when we had so much chat earlier to see if I can find any. I did see one. Here's one from Laura Wardlow. We were discussing what to do with, preserving. When I thought maybe fixing meant preserving, but Laura made the suggestion of putting your watercolor under glass to help protect it, and thank you for that.
Barb asks for any tips about drawing animals that move.
Ah. Well, Rebecca, I don't know if you have suggestions for drawing moving animals. I know that that's a topic that came up somewhat in November during our webinar. And again, next week, it will likely come up again, but
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
I can't start my video. It says unable to,
No.
which might be why other people didn't get to start their video. I don't know.
Okay. I might need to unpin your hand. So
Okay.
removing the spotlight.
Oh, someone's showing their drawing. I just saw that. That's so cool. I love it. Thank you.
Yes. Ari Bruzon, thank you.
Oh, I still can't start my video. I don't know why. It just says you
Okay.
can't start your video because the host has stopped it. Oh,
Oh,
and someone else is showing. That's so cool. I love that you guys drew with me. That's awesome. It looks so good. That's so cool. Mark is gonna send out the slideshow too, so you guys can have my photos to, well, if you wanted to, like my mini clip, like the 9 or 7 slides I had. If there's a way to get that to people, they can use the photos that I had.
yes.
Oh, I see the acorn at the top too. And someone drew all 3. Wow, you guys are super fast. It looks so good. I didn't even get that far. Oh, nice. And someone drew the other pine cone, like the shorter, this one. Because like I had this one too. So that's awesome. I see that there. They look so good. This is so cool. Like everyone just like hung out and drew. I love it. Yay.
All
Well,
right.
yes. So I can, while you can't see me, you can hear me. So I will try to talk about the movement. So that is a great way to learn how animals move. We call that gesture drawing, and I have done that. So I'm going to see what I can find. Here's one of my nature journals. We went to an owl presentation at Maine Audubon, and I don't know if you guys can see this. Okay, now you can see me. On the screen that showed my hands, this one, I have a couple nature journal spreads. The pencil I was using was kind of light, but these owls were moving around. I didn't capture a lot of detail, but I got, like with this one, this was a snowy owl that someone had tethered to them. And they did this wing action. And my best advice is to look back and forth at your paper. Oh, more pine cones. Sorry, that is so amazing. Yay. It's awesome. My best advice is to look at the subject that you're drawing as often as you're looking at your paper. And it's going to feel like a disconnect, but draw fast and look at your subject. You're constantly looking back and forth. Let me see what else I had in here. I think I had more. Yeah. So right here, this one, this was a great horned owl, and they were preening. And I just loved the action that they had their tail like in this sideways fan. And I'm sure this is not perfect. These are super sketchy. But I love that they feel like there's movement. So my best advice is to look back and forth from the subject to your paper, draw fast, because they move really fast, as you know. If an animal is at full speed running, it might not be the best time to draw it, but you can still observe it and maybe get like the structure down. Like I can't really picture this, but like, let's say there was, you know, someone wants to draw a cat running. I would get the shapes. That's not dark enough. And use this for the legs. Like, how are the legs moving? Where is their tail? Where is their head? What are their ears doing? And that's kind of how I would get animals that are in fast movement. I would focus on structure and learn about the motion more than I would worry about, you know, details here. And this guy was, or girl, I don't know, but they were holding very still. And so I was able to get a little bit more, but even then this was a really quick, probably 1 minute drawing, but 1 minute with a live animal feels like a long time. So yeah, just look back and forth. I hope that helps.
All right. Well, thank you again, Rebekah, and thanks everyone for attending. I will be on for a few more minutes. If anybody wants to stay on, you're welcome to chat. You're welcome to show your drawing. And otherwise, thank you again, and maybe we'll see you next week.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Mark. Thanks, Rebekah.
And Suzanne, I have the address. I'll send it to you for.
Okay.
Sarah
Mari has her
Bernard.
hand up.
Oh, okay. You said somebody has their hand up?
Yeah, Mari.
Okay.
Yes, my
Sorry.
name is Maria, but
Mari.
my phone didn't connect quickly, so I changed to my computer, so that's why my name is incomplete. But I have a question for Rebekah. I'm planning to draw and paint a tree. So do you have any keys to suggest me how to apply to the tree?
Yeah, so these flowers are a lot like sorry, I'll move this so we can come back to the tansy. This type of flower is a lot like the structure of a tree in that, you know, it has branches, it branches out. So with trees, one of the biggest things is also looking for those negative shapes. So you're going to have a trunk, it's going to be wider than these stems. And then you're going to have branches that branch out. And a way to check your angles of where the branches lie is by looking at the negative shapes in between. Leaves add to it too. So leaves, I wouldn't worry about drawing every leaf, but I would think of it more as a texture. So I might take, you know, a slightly bigger brush, depending on if you're watercoloring or drawing. But I like to paint with, like, you know, this type of motion where you're kind of just taking the brush and tapping it onto the paper. If I was painting it, if I was drawing it, I would start with a light pressure. Let me see if I can get another piece of paper here. I would start with let's say I'm thinking that this is a tree, right? I would start with a light pressure for the leaves and kind of build up, adding shadow. And one thing I've noticed with sections of trees is that, let's say you had this whole area where leaves, depending on your light source, you're going to have a darker area of leaves than a lighter one. So maybe down here, you're pressing harder, and then up top, you're letting it be lighter to show the direction of light, and that adds volume and depth. So that's kind of how I handle trees, depending on the kind. If they're an evergreen type tree, pay attention to the way that the branches go, because sometimes trees, you think their branches come down, sometimes they go up. So if it's like a conifer, you know, like a spruce or I'm blanking on the other kinds right now, fir, spruce, like they all have different directions that their branches go. Some are down, but not every tree has downward branches. Some go up. So that's what I would look for in trees is variation in branch direction and texture of leaves and negative space of where the branches are.
Just find it.
So I hope that helps.
Yes, sure. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Well, I'll see if I can do some muting here.
I love that these stems kind of look like little trees.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't see any more questions coming up,
Okay.
so I think that'll do it.
Great.
Rebecca, thanks.
Thank you.
Really great.
And I'll get that artwork out or the art materials out to Sarah as soon as possible.
Okay. I
As
just
in tomorrow.
emailed you her address.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.